The paramedic who called my parents said I was stable but needed monitoring. My mother's response, word for word, was, "Can this wait a couple of hours? We're in the middle of something." I was 31 years old, lying on a stretcher in the emergency bay at Sunnybrook, and my mother wanted to know if my potential brain bleed could wait. It could not. Let me back up. My name is Renee, and for most of my adult life I believed that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, stayed patient enough, my family would eventually see me as more than the daughter who was fine. The one who didn't need anything, the one who always figured it out. I'm a civil engineer. I graduated from the University of Waterloo when I was 23, started with a firm in Mississauga, and by 28 I was managing infrastructure projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I know how to read stress fractures in concrete. I understand load-bearing capacity. The irony that I missed all the signs my own family had been treating me like a load-bearing wall for a decade, taking all the weight, never acknowledged until something cracked, is not lost on me. My husband Patrick noticed before I did. We met during a work conference in Ottawa 7 years ago. He's an environmental consultant, quiet in a way that makes people underestimate him, and he has this habit of watching a room before he says anything. 3 months into our relationship, he watched my family at Thanksgiving dinner and then very carefully said to me on the drive home, "I notice your parents only talk to you about your sister tonight." I told him he was wrong. He wasn't. My younger sister, Danny, is 2 years younger than me, and she has been my parents' focal point for as long as I can remember. This isn't jealousy talking. I've spent enough money on therapy to know the difference between jealousy and pattern recognition. Danny is funny, charismatic, emotionally volatile in a way my parents have always mistaken for passion, and she has never, not once in her adult life, paid a bill on time without someone bailing her out first. I have been that someone more times than I can count, not because I was asked nicely, because the alternative was watching my parents drain their retirement savings, and I love them, and I was raised to believe that's what you do. By 31, I had quietly covered Danny's first and last month's rent in Vancouver when she decided to restart her life. Home $400. Her car insurance after her second at-fault collision, $1,800. Half of a credit card bill she'd run up buying furniture for an apartment she left 8 months later, $11. A loan to help her finish a photography course she quit after 3 classes, $650. Patrick knew about some of it, not all of it. I was ashamed of how much I'd let it become normal. The day everything changed started the way a lot of bad days start, quietly, with no warning. I was at my office in Mississauga, wrapping up a project review meeting. I'd had a headache since the morning. Not unusual, I get migraines occasionally, but this one sat differently. Behind my right eye and deep into my temple, not pounding, but pressing. Constant. I took 2 Advil and told myself to drink more water. By 2 p.m, it had moved. That's the only way I can describe it. The pressure shifted to the back of my head, and I started feeling dizzy when I stood up. One of my colleagues, a structural tech named Yolanda, who'd had a family member with an aneurysm, looked at me during our afternoon site briefing and said flatly, "You need to go to a hospital. Right now." I laughed it off. I told her I was fine. At 2:47 p.m, I passed out at my desk. I don't remember the fall. I remember waking up to Yolanda's voice and the sound of the office phone, and then nothing again until the ambulance. The paramedics asked me my name, where I was, what day it was. I got 2 out of 3. That scared me more than the headache. At the hospital, they moved fast. CT scan within the first 30 minutes. The ER doctor, a calm, direct woman who did not sugarcoat things, told me there was a finding they needed to take seriously. A small bleed near the base of my skull, possibly from a vascular abnormality, possibly from the fall itself. And they needed to determine which before deciding next steps. She used words like observation and possible surgical consult, and we want a neurosurgeon to look at this tonight. I asked her if I should be scared. She said, "You should be glad you came in when you did." I was conscious, I was scared, and somehow in the fog of that moment my brain went to my parents. Not because I needed them to sign anything. I was a 31-year-old adult, fully alert, perfectly capable of making my own medical decisions. But because when you're lying in a hospital bed and someone says possible surgical consult, you want your mother. It's embarrassing and true at the same time. Patrick had already been called. He was my emergency contact, the way it should be. He was in a site meeting in Hamilton, and he left the moment his phone rang. Estimated arrival, 45 minutes. While I waited, I asked the nurse if she could call my parents, just to let them know, just so they could come. The nurse called them at 3:15 p.m. My mother picked up. The nurse explained the situation calmly. Their daughter had been brought in by ambulance. There was a finding on the CT. Doctors were monitoring. She was conscious and stable. Could they come to Sunnybrook? My mother said, "Can this wait a couple of hours? We're in the middle of something." The nurse, to her credit, said that it was not something that could wait, that the patient had a neurological finding and the family should come. My mother put my father on the phone. My father asked if I was dying. The nurse said they couldn't confirm that, which was not the reassurance he was looking for. He told her they would come as soon as possible. They did not come as soon as possible. 3:15 p.m. Nurse called my parents. They said they'd come. 4:20 p.m. Patrick arrived. He walked in, took one look at me, took my hand, and didn't let go. He didn't say, "I'm sure it's nothing." He didn't perform calmness for my benefit. He sat down beside me and said, "I'm here. Tell me everything they've said." That man. I don't have the words. 4:40 p.m. Patrick texted my parents politely to let them know where I was and what room I was in. 5:05 p.m. No response. 5:30 p.m. Patrick called my father directly. My father picked up on the fourth ring. Patrick asked where they were. My father said, and I want you to understand I am not paraphrasing, "Your sister-in-law had a situation. She got pulled over on the DVP and the ticket was over $300 and she's very upset. We're dealing with it." Patrick told me this later and I watched him work very hard to keep his voice neutral. $340. Danny had been speeding on the Don Valley Parkway, had been pulled over, had gotten a $340 ticket, which, by the way, she had the money to pay. She was employed and was very upset, and my parents were with her instead of at the hospital with me. Patrick said, as calmly as a man can say something like this, "Your other daughter is in the hospital with a brain bleed. We need you here." My father said they would come when things settled down. 6 p.m. The neurosurgeon had reviewed my scans. The bleed was small, the source was likely the fall rather than a vascular abnormality, and the plan was 24-hour observation with repeat imaging in the morning. Good news, relatively speaking. I was not going into surgery that night. I was going to be watched very carefully, and if anything changed, that conversation would happen fast. I cried when he told me, not from fear, from relief and from something else I couldn't name yet. 6:45 p.m. My parents arrived. My father walked in first. He stopped when he saw Patrick sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, a coffee from the Tim Hortons downstairs on the tray table beside me. He looked at Patrick. He looked at me. He said, "Oh, he's here." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm so sorry we took so long." Just, "Oh, he's here," like Patrick's presence was somehow a surprise or an inconvenience. My mother came in behind him. She looked tired. She looked like someone had been emotionally exhausting her all afternoon, and I realized she had been holding Danny's hand for 3 hours while I was in a hospital bed alone. She said, "The neurosurgeon already came?" I said yes. She said, "Oh, good, so it wasn't that serious." I want to tell you that I said something powerful in that moment. I want to tell you I sat up and looked her in the eye and said everything that needed to be said. I didn't. I was exhausted and I still had leads on my chest, and I just looked at her and didn't say anything at all. Patrick squeezed my hand once. My parents stayed for 40 minutes. My father checked his phone twice. My mother told me a story about the last time Danny had gotten a ticket and how stressful it had been for the whole family. At one point she said, "You know how sensitive she is." I know how sensitive she is. I was discharged the next afternoon. The repeat imaging was clear. Follow up with a neurologist in 6 weeks. No strenuous activity. Watch for symptoms. I went home, I slept for 14 hours, and when I woke up, Patrick had made breakfast and left it on the counter with a note that just said, "You're the strongest person I know." I did not feel strong. I felt like I had been underwater for a long time, and I had only just, broken the surface. Over the next few weeks, something changed in me. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't one specific conversation or one specific moment. It was more like a door that I had been leaning against for years, slowly, finally swinging open on its own. Patrick and I talked. Properly talked, not the kind of talking I'd been doing where I minimized everything and told him it was fine. I told him about the $1,800 for the insurance, the $2,400 for Vancouver, the $650 for the photography course. All of it. He sat very still, and when I finished he said, "I knew some of it, I didn't know how much." Then he said, "What do you want to do?" That was the question, not "you need to cut them off" or "this is unacceptable," just "what do I want to do?" He gave me the decision because it was mine to make. What I decided was this: I was going to stop. Not out of anger, not as punishment, not because I wanted to blow anything up. I was going to stop paying for things that weren't my responsibility. I was going to stop being available for every crisis, and I was going to see what happened when I wasn't the solution anymore. I called my mother 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital. I told her I loved her. I told her I'd been doing a lot of thinking. I told her that going forward I wouldn't be in a position to help financially anymore, not with Danny's bills, not with any supplemental expenses, and that I hoped we could still have a relationship that wasn't built around me being available to solve problems. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't understand why you're punishing us." I said I wasn't. I said I was setting a limit. She said, "After everything we've done for you." I thought about Sunnybrook. I thought about 3:15 p.m. I thought about, can this wait a couple of hours? I said, "Mom, I had a brain bleed." She said, "The doctor said it wasn't serious." The doctor said it wasn't serious because they caught it in time and monitored it for 24 hours and everything resolved, I thought. Not because it was fine to wait 3.5 hours to show up. I didn't say that. I just said, "I have to go. I love you." The months that followed were uncomfortable in the way that necessary things often are. My mother called occasionally, conversations that were civil and strange, like we were both performing a version of ourselves we no longer quite fit. Danny called twice, once to ask if I could help with something small, and I said no, and she hung up after about 30 seconds. My father sent me a text on my birthday that said, "Happy birthday, sweetie, hope you're well," and I texted back, "Thank you, love you." And that was the entirety of our exchange. Patrick and I bought a house in Hamilton. We have a small yard with a garden I started from seed in late February and carried to the back porch in trays and eventually got into the ground in May. It took longer than it should have because I was still going to the neurologist and they wanted me careful. I didn't care. I was outside in the dirt with a garden fork and the light was good and I felt like myself for the first time in a very long time. The thing I didn't expect, the thing no one tells you about when you talk about setting limits with family, is how much grief there is in it. Not anger, grief. I wasn't grieving the family I had. I was grieving the family I'd spent 30 years trying to build with them, the one where they showed up, the one where I wasn't the only one carrying things. That family was never real. That losing a dream hurts the same as losing something real. Sometimes more. 3 months after the hospital, I was at a work event, a retirement dinner for one of our senior partners, held at a venue in downtown Toronto. Patrick came as my +1. My firm had given me a recognition award that year for project leadership on a major transit corridor contract, and my director had said some genuinely kind things about my work in front of the room. My parents were not there, obviously, but Danny was. In a way, my mother had mentioned at some point that she'd told Danny about the award, and Danny had apparently said something like, "Good for her," which my mother relayed to me as if it were a generous gift. I was at our table after the speeches, talking with Yolanda, who was there because she was also being recognized for her work on the same project, and she said, "Are your parents here tonight?" I said, "No." She said, "That's a shame." And then, because Yolanda is one of those people who sees things clearly and doesn't make a big deal out of it, she moved right on. "Well, you did the work, you know that." I do know that. What I also know now, which I didn't know at 31, I am not a load-bearing wall. I'm a person, and a person gets to decide how much weight they carry. About 6 months after the hospital, Patrick and I went to visit his family in Sudbury for a long weekend. His mother, Diane, is 72 and makes her own pasta and has opinions about everything and tells you them without hesitation, and I adore her. On the second evening we were there, we were all sitting on the back deck after dinner, and she asked me, out of nowhere, how I was doing since the hospital. I told her I was doing well. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Good, because you gave us a scare." And then she reached over and patted my hand twice the way someone does when they mean it and don't need to make a speech about it. I thought about my mother saying, so it wasn't that serious. I thought about 3:15 p.m. and, can this wait? I thought about Patrick in that hospital room, his hand around mine, a Tim Hortons coffee going cold on the tray table. I said to Diane, "Thank you, I'm really glad I'm okay too." She said, "So is this whole table." My phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "Hey, Mom said you got some big award at work. That's cool. Hey, also, are you doing anything with your old winter jacket? I was thinking I could borrow it for the season." I put my phone face down on the armrest. The evening light was coming through the birch trees at the edge of Diane's yard. Patrick was laughing at something his brother said. The pasta had been extraordinary. My head didn't hurt. I left a text unread, and for the first time in a long time, I was completely fine with that. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the CT scan, not the doctor saying we're glad you came in when you did. The moment I keep returning to is smaller than that. It's Patrick's hand around mine, and the Tim Hortons cup going cold on the tray table, and the particular quality of the silence in that room before my parents arrived. A silence that was somehow more present, more honest, than anything that came after. I spent a long time trying to understand how a family gets to that point. How parents can hear your daughter has a neurological finding and think, this can wait. I don't think it was cruelty. I think it was something that had calcified over years. A belief, never examined, that I would always be fine, that Renee figures things out, that the one who doesn't make noise doesn't need tending to. And the painful truth is that I helped build that belief. Every time I quietly covered a bill. Every time I said, "Don't worry about it." Every time I absorbed something that should have been named and addressed, I was confirming it. I was telling them, through my actions, that I was load-bearing and inexhaustible. What I understand now is that real integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself first. For years, I told myself I was being generous. I was being a good daughter, a good sister. And maybe some of it was, but a lot of it was fear dressed up as generosity. Fear of conflict, fear of being the one who broke the peace, fear of what it would mean to say, "This is not okay, and I won't keep pretending it is." The morning I called my mother and told her I was done covering things that weren't mine to cover. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just, finally, telling the truth. Clarity is something you earn through paying attention. Patrick paid attention when I couldn't. Yolanda paid attention when she looked at me across a briefing table and said, "You need to go to a hospital right now." And she was right, and I almost didn't listen. The people who actually see you are rarely the ones you expect, and the people you've been trying hardest to be seen by are sometimes the last ones to look. What I know about endurance now is different from what I thought I knew. I used to think endurance meant absorbing things without complaint, keeping your head down, carrying more, not making a fuss. That's not endurance. That's erosion. Real endurance is what you do after the thing that should have broken you. It's going back to the neurologist at 6 weeks and then 12 weeks and doing the follow-up scans. It's buying a house and starting a garden from seed and getting your hands in the dirt on a cold May morning, even when your body is still catching up. It's choosing, deliberately, to build something that is actually yours. I left Danny's text on read that evening in Sudbury. The birch trees were catching the last of the light, and Patrick was laughing, and Diane had made pasta from scratch, and I was, genuinely, completely fine. I used to think that not responding was unkind. Now I think it was just accurate. Not everything deserves an answer. Some things you just let sit there while you get on with your life. The garden came up beautifully, by the way. Took longer than it should have. Worth every minute.